I'm Tony Cox, and this is News and Notes. This week, Democratic loyalists, political junkies, and millions of television viewers have watched Michelle Obama, Hillary, and Bill Clinton step to the podium and narrate their hopes and goals for this political season. Tonight, Barack Obama will give a much-anticipated acceptance speech for his historic nomination in front of 75,000 people at Invesco Field in Denver. But what makes a good versus a great speech? And what great speeches inspire other speech writers? Joining me for a closer look at the art of public speaking are Susan Estrich, a professor of law and political science at the University of Southern California. She was also Mike Dukakis' presidential campaign manager in 1988. Chris Winston worked in the George H.W. Bush administration and was the first woman to head the speech writing staff at the White House, and Charlton McIllwain, assistant professor of culture and communication at New York University. Welcome, all three of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Let's begin with this. I'm going to ask each of you the very same question out of the box, and that is this. Have we heard a great speech yet this week from the Democrats? Susan, you first.
I think we've heard three great speeches. I mean, I thought Michelle Obama was terrific on Monday night. I thought Hillary hit a home run on Tuesday night. And I thought Bill Clinton hit a home run on Wednesday night. The question, of course, is whether any of those speeches will actually move voters into Barack Obama's column. And the real definition of a great speech is one that not just entertains us or impresses us, but moves votes. And I don't know the answer to that question yet.
Well, what about you, Chris? Do you think you heard anything from anyone that suggests they were vote movers?
Well, I would have to disagree slightly. I'm sure Susan's surprised to hear that, but I thought Michelle Obama's speech was a good speech. I thought Hillary Clinton did a masterful job with a good speech. I thought Bill Clinton's speech was a great speech last night. But having said all of that, if the definition is moving voters, today's Gallup poll and Rasmussen poll, tracking polls, basically show no movement. This race is stalled at about a point or two. Obama's up a point today. He was up a point yesterday. So the speeches, if you look at numbers, haven't done much yet.
What do you say, Charlton?
Well, I agree with everyone thus far. I think they've all been good speeches, but the one that really blew me away that I didn't expect was John Kerry's speech last night. I thought he did a masterful job of defining John McCain and sort of placing this candidate McCain against the Senator McCain. And I think that was a good way of defining and showing the disconnect between him and his rhetoric.
Well, you're all experienced speech writers, so let's talk about what goes into making it. And Susan, my question is this. How many people does it take, and does the old adage, too many cooks in the kitchen, apply to speech writing as well?
I think so. I mean, I've spent more of my time reviewing speeches than writing them. I find writing them extremely difficult. But I do remember back in 1980 when Ted Kennedy was on the verge of making a great speech. And I was sitting in Steve Smith's house, his brother-in-law's house, and he got a draft of the speech. And there must have been 10 people who wanted to take a look, take a crack. And Bob Shrum, who had been one of the primary drafters, maybe the primary drafter, was running around in the way only Shrum can, basically saying, keep your hands off this speech. If too many people get a hold of this speech, it's going to lose its magic. And I think there's some truth to that, actually.
You know, speaking of magic, Chris, catchphrases or memorable sound bites are always a part of great speeches. Here's a part of a speech from President John F. Kennedy's inauguration in 1961.
The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
So, Chris, does a lot of work go into creating these phrases, or do they simply grow organically out of the writing process?
Well, today, in this day and age, unlike back then, sound bites have become the sort of bread and butter of most speeches. In some ways, sadly, I think. Obviously, Ted Sorensen and John Kennedy, when they put that speech together, that was for a different kind of audience, a much more serious, historic event. And it's not to say conventions aren't, but it's usually a different tone that you have for a convention than you do for an inauguration. And the kind of language you use tends to be less flowery and rhetorical. So it does make a difference, I think, in terms of venues. Now, having said that, over the last few days, we've had some funny lines that people have used. Hillary Clinton's comment about the sisterhood of the traveling pantsuits, as a person who wears pantsuits, I loved that comment. I thought it was a very funny joke. And there have been several over the course of the last few days, but I have not heard what I would call a very lofty phrase that has caught my attention, at least up to now.
Well, Charlton, let's turn our attention to tonight and Barack Obama's speech. But before we talk about that, I want to play another speech from someone who was a master at giving speeches. Ronald Reagan is who I'm speaking of. We have a clip here from one of his speeches in 1981 at his inauguration.
Can anyone look at the record of this administration and say, well done? Can anyone compare the state of our economy when the Carter administration took office with where we are today and say, keep up the good work? Can anyone look at our reduced standing in the world today and say, let's have 4 more years of this?
So, Charlton, does Barack Obama need to give a Ronald Reagan-esque speech tonight?
Actually, I don't think he needs to. I think he needs really to take that idea from Barbara Jordan in 1976 when she said the necessity is to not only point out the problems of the present, but to be able to point out and define solutions. And I think that's really what Obama needs to do tonight, to really be concrete, to be able to say, look, there are some problems, but here are some things that we can do that will work. Here's how they will work, and here's how we're going to put them in place.
Well, in fact,